They are not waiting for it to happen. It already happened. In specific counties, in specific towns, on specific farms where the irrigation pivot stopped turning years ago, and the fields that used to grow corn now grow something smaller, drier, and worth a fraction of what irrigation made possible. The regions that the rest of the country is being told to prepare for. The places that will lose their aquifer access and be forced to reinvent agriculture from the ground up already exist. They are already there. You can drive to them. You can talk to the farmers. You can look at the well logs and the crop insurance claims and the school enrollment numbers and the bank records and watch the transition that everyone else is being warned about play out in real time in communities that are past the warning stage. This is not the future of American farming without water. This is the present of it. Start in Texas. South of Lubbock, in the counties where the southern Ogallala aquifer has been dropping for 40 years and is now, in the terminology of the Texas A&M agricultural economists who study it, pretty much dryland already. Jackie Smith, a professor and extension economist at Texas A&M, said it without hedging. There are whole counties that are pretty much dryland now. Not transitioning, not approaching the threshold, already there. The irrigated agriculture that defined those counties for 2 generations has contracted to the point where the dominant farming model is no longer irrigation dependent. It is rainfall dependent. And the Texas South Plains does not get enough rainfall to grow what those counties used to grow. What they grow now is mostly cotton, some dry land sorghum. Before irrigation arrived in the mid-20th century and transformed the region into one of the most productive agricultural areas in the world, cotton and sorghum were what farmers grew above the Ogalala. That is what they are going back to. Not by choice, by depletion. The aquifer beneath them made one kind of agriculture possible. It is leaving, and it is taking that agriculture with it. And what remains is older, simpler, and far less capable of generating the income that the families above it built their lives around. The economic consequences of that contraction are not abstract in Lubbock County, or Terry County, or Hockley County. They are visible in the infrastructure. The cotton gin and cottonseed processing facilities and bale storage and equipment dealers concentrated around Lubbock exist because the region produces over 60% of Texas's total cotton yield, and more than 1/3 of the nation's total cotton crop. That concentration of processing capacity was built for irrigated volumes. It was sized for a level of production that irrigation made possible. As irrigation retreats county by county, and dryland cotton replaces irrigated cotton at a fraction of the yield per acre, the throughput volumes that justify the infrastructure start to thin. Equipment dealers sized for irrigated agriculture lose customers. Gin capacity that was profitable at irrigated volumes becomes costly overhead at dryland volumes. In 2022, the peak year of a drought that has now lasted 6 continuous years across the southern plains, 74% of the Texas cotton crop was abandoned, not reduced. Abandoned, a normal season would have produced a $2.4 billion cotton crop. The drought year produced $640 million. 25% of the corn planted that year was never harvested. 45% of the soybean crop was abandoned in the field. The drought cost the agricultural industries of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas an estimated $23.6 billion across the 5 years from 2020 through 2024. Texas cattle herds fell from 13.1 million head to 12 million in that same period. Oklahoma's fell from 5.3 million to 4.7 million. Kansas from 6.5 million to 6.15 million. These are not numbers from a projection model. They are numbers from the USDA census and the agricultural insurance claims and the livestock auction records of what actually happened to the farming economy of the southern plains while the aquifer kept dropping and the drought kept coming. In 2025 alone, the United States lost 15,000 small farms and ranches, closed, consolidated, or abandoned. Texas lost the most of any state, 2,000 farms gone in a single year. The total number of farms in the United States has fallen from 2 million in 2018 to approximately 1.9 million today. 315 farms filed for Chapter 12 bankruptcy in 2025, a 46% increase from the year before. The American Farm Bureau called Chapter 12 a last resort for farmers who have already exhausted every other option and are trying to restructure debt that the revenue from their land can no longer service. Those bankruptcy filings are the sound a farming economy makes when the water is already gone. Now, go to California, to Tulare County in the southern San Joaquin Valley, where the story of what happens to rural communities when industrial agriculture drains the aquifer faster than anyone can use it has already been written in full, and the people living it are not farmers. They are families in unincorporated communities who turned on their kitchen faucets and found nothing. Tulare County is home to 60% of all residential wells that have gone dry in the state of California. Not statewide average share. 60%. This single county, which sits above one of the most critically overdrafted groundwater basins in the United States, has watched its domestic water supply erode well by well as the large agricultural operations above the same aquifer drill deeper, pump faster, and push the water table below the depth that residential and small community wells can reach. The town of East Orosi went entirely dry. So did Tooleville. Families in these communities stopped being able to get water from their own wells, not in a slowly degrading way, but completely. The wells stopped producing. The faucets stopped running. They shifted to hauled water, to tank trucks, to bottled water donated by charities and local organizations trying to cover the gap between what the aquifer no longer provided and what the family still needed every day to drink and cook and bathe. A nonprofit called Self-Help Enterprises based in Visalia became one of the primary infrastructure systems serving communities whose water infrastructure had failed. They deliver water tanks. They coordinate water hauling. They are doing the work that a functional water supply system is supposed to make unnecessary. More than 200 residential wells across the San Joaquin Valley have gone dry since the state began tracking the data 12 years ago. The California Department of Water Resources has acknowledged that this number is undoubtedly underrepresentative. The actual number of failed wells is higher, because not all dry well events are reported to the state system. In the same period that 4,200 residential wells went dry, almost 7,000 new agricultural wells were drilled statewide. The industrial farms that drain the aquifer are drilling deeper. The residential wells that cannot afford to drill deeper are going dry. The water is moving from one set of users to another, underground, invisible, with no mechanism to stop it. The Tulare Lake Groundwater Basin, which provides water to hundreds of square miles of dairies and farms, including land owned by J.G. Boswell Company, one of the largest agricultural operations in the United States, has been officially designated as critically overdrafted by the California Department of Water Resources. California water officials have moved to place groundwater agencies in the Tulare Basin on probation for failing to develop adequate plans to stop the overpumping that is driving residential wells to failure. The state's own regulatory body has concluded that the current management plans will allow substantial impacts to people who rely on domestic wells for drinking, bathing, food preparation, and cleaning. Substantial impacts. That is the official language for what is already happening in East Orosi, in Tooleville, and the unincorporated communities of Fresno County, where residents are driving to charitable water distribution points because the infrastructure beneath their homes has been effectively consumed by the fields around them. The ground is also sinking. This is the physical consequence of aquifer extraction that most people do not know about, and that no planning document resolves with any realistic timeline. When water is removed from an aquifer, the clay layers between the water-bearing sediments compress. The land above them subsides. In the San Joaquin Valley, NASA satellite data has measured land subsidence of up to 2 feet per year in some areas, a direct physical consequence of the groundwater extraction that feeds the farms. The California Aqueduct, which carries water from Northern California through the valley to supply cities and farms across the state, has sunk in portions of its route. The canal's capacity has been reduced because the land it runs through is no longer at the elevation it was built for. The infrastructure built to deliver water to farms and cities is being physically deformed by the same extraction that the infrastructure was designed to support. This is what happens when an aquifer runs out. The damage is not just the absence of water. It is structural, permanent. The compressed clay layers do not re-expand when water returns. The land does not rise back up. The storage capacity that took geological ages to develop is gone in the specific zones where compaction has occurred. Even if the rainfall returned and the recharge rates accelerated, the aquifer in compacted zones cannot hold what it held before. The geometry of underground storage has been permanently altered. And then there is the eastern fringe of the Ogallala in New Mexico, the area that Panhandle PBs identified in a 2024 documentary as the preview of what the Texas Panhandle is approaching. On the southern and eastern edges of the aquifer, where the saturated thickness was thinnest to begin with and has been declining the longest. The farming communities that will not be imagining this future in 10 years are already managing it today. Towns along the New Mexico-Texas border in the southern high plains have been watching water tables drop for decades without the buffering depth that the thicker portions of the aquifer in Nebraska and northern Kansas still provide. The transition those communities are making, from irrigated agriculture to dryland, from full crop cycles to partial ones, from towns built for irrigation scale economic activity to towns managing with dryland scale economic activity, is the same transition that the Panhandle communities further north are being told they have decades to prepare for. They do not have decades. The Texas A&M economists know it. The Panhandle PB's documentary said it. The communities on the fringe have been living it. The institutional response to all of this is real, and it is happening. Kansas passed a new state law in 2024 requiring all 5 of its groundwater management districts to submit formal action plans for addressing aquifer decline by July 1st, 2026. California's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act has generated over 1,500 management projects and actions. Annual managed groundwater recharge in California averaged 2.5 million acre-feet across water years 2022 through 2024. A $25 million LandFlex grant program compensated growers who voluntarily reduced pumping, saving over 100,000 acre-feet and protecting 16,500 drinking water wells. These are not symbolic gestures. They are real interventions. But they are interventions that are racing against a depletion rate that has not paused for the management response to catch up. In 41% of monitored California wells, water levels rose 5 feet or more between 2014 and 2024, a genuine improvement attributable to wet years and managed recharge efforts. In 20% of monitored wells, levels declined by 5 feet or more in the same period. The managed recharge is working in some basins. It is not keeping pace with extraction in others. And the residential wells going dry in Tulare County are not going dry in the basins where the recharge is working best. They are going dry where the extraction pressure is highest and the management response is weakest. The 2025 data from the USDA shows that the farming contraction is not slowing. It is accelerating. 15,000 farms gone in 1 year. Chapter 12 bankruptcies up 46%. Texas losing more farms than any other state. The trend line does not run toward stability. It runs toward fewer farms, larger consolidations, more land owned by fewer entities operating on thinner margins with less resilience to the dry years that the Great Plains and the San Joaquin Valley will continue to deliver. The communities above the failing aquifers are already showing the demographic consequences of economic contraction in agricultural counties. Rural population decline in counties where irrigation is retreating follows a predictable sequence. Farm employment falls as irrigated acreage shrinks. Farm supply businesses lose volume. Schools lose enrollment, first slowly, then fast enough to trigger consolidation. When a county school district consolidates, the town that hosted the closed school loses a function that was anchoring population. Families with children move to where the schools are. The property tax base that funded local services contracts. Hospital services that require minimum patient volumes to remain financially viable lose that minimum. The hospital reduces services or closes. And a county that once organized its economic life around what irrigation made possible becomes a county organized around what dryland farming and cattle grazing at marginal Great Plains rainfall levels will support. That is a structurally smaller economy, a structurally smaller population, and a structurally smaller food production system. 95% of San Joaquin Valley communities depend on groundwater as their primary source of drinking water. The same aquifer system that irrigates the most productive farmland in the United States is the water source for the people who live in the towns between the farms. When industrial agriculture drains that aquifer faster than it can be recharged, and it is draining it faster, the residential wells fail before the agricultural operations do, because residential wells are shallow and agricultural wells are deep, and the economics of drilling deeper favor the operations that can afford the cost. The communities at the bottom of the economic hierarchy in these agricultural regions are the first to lose running water. They are already losing it. They have already lost it in some towns. And the state regulatory response, which is real and funded and ongoing, is operating on a timeline measured in years, while the wells are failing on a timeline measured in months. There is a specific image that captures what it looks like when the last well goes dry in an agricultural community that built its entire existence around water. It is the image of a family in East Orosi, California, opening a faucet and finding nothing. It is a town whose water system has ceased to function not because of infrastructure failure, but because the aquifer beneath it has been extracted to below the level that the infrastructure can reach. It is the charity worker from self-help enterprises coordinating the delivery of water tanks to homes that used to have running water and now have a plastic tank in the yard and a schedule for when the truck comes. That image is not a warning about the future of American farming without water. It is a photograph of its present. The transition that policymakers discuss in planning documents and projection models and legislative hearings is not a transition that is coming for the hardest hit communities. It already came. It already arrived at 4 a.m, when the pump started pulling air, when the faucet ran dry, when the field that used to grow irrigated corn came up in dryland sorghum for the 3rd year in a row at a yield that makes the debt service impossible. The communities that are already living this future are not in the news because dry wells and farm bankruptcies and school consolidations in rural agricultural counties accumulate quietly, not catastrophically. There is no single day that marks the transition. There is just the slow arithmetic of depletion, the water table dropping another foot this year, another foot next year. And one day, the pump hitting air and nobody being particularly surprised, because the logs said it was coming and it came right on schedule. What American farming becomes when the last well goes dry is already visible in the counties where that transition has already happened. It is smaller. It is drier. It feeds fewer people than it used to at higher cost per unit of production. And the communities above it are quieter than they were, with fewer children in the schools and fewer businesses on the main street, and fewer reasons for anyone who has a choice to stay. The future that the rest of the country is being warned about is the present that these communities are already living, and nobody is moving fast enough to change what comes next.